Hi there, my name is Nick Murdick. I'm the mountain bike product manager at Shimano America, and today we're talking about the differences between the new XT and SLX groups and the previous generation. We're pretty excited to present both groups at the same time. They are together rounding out our mountain bike performance lineup, bringing real mountain bike performance to the entire category. It's a big change for us, right? Introducing two groups at the same time and kind of big changes to the group as well. Clearly, mountain bikes have evolved really, really quickly over the last couple of years, and the market told us that the specs that they needed for real mountain biking were evolving really, really quickly, and we needed to rise to the occasion and meet those specs. So what we'll see kind of across the board on all of our high-level groups, SLX, XT, and XTR, of course, is a wide-range cassette. So we've got a 1051 with a single front chainring in the front, great chain retention, and then we've also got several options as well. So if you feel like something a little bit different fits your needs better, then you've got options for more of a rhythm step cassette, so tighter gear steps and perfectly even gear steps all the way across the cassette. And you can run that 1045 cassette as either a single up front, or you can run it as a double as well. Of course, all the parts are interchangeable, so you can kind of customize your own bike and make it your own and ride the way that you want to. So if you want something a little lighter, a little more race oriented, then you can pick out some XTR parts. And if value and durability are what's important, then we've got a mix of SLX and XT parts as well for you. So we'll start going through the component group kind of bit by bit and talk about what the differences are, right? So starting with the shifters. We've got kind of some classic technology that has always been around for the last couple generations. Things like instant release and two-way release and multi-release is really one of the important ones that you can click multiple gears at a time, both shifting towards an easier gear or a harder gear. So XTR and XT both get those features. With SLX, we get the two-way release, but we don't get multi-release, right? So same as the previous generation there. But what we have evolved from the previous generation is the ergonomics. So it fits better in your hand. And on the XT shifter, we actually increase the resistance of the second click a little bit to help avoid accidental double shifting. And we made it really adjustable. So the iSpec version that mounts directly to the brake lever, we've got a massive range of adjustment side to side and rotationally, so you can get that shifter exactly where you need it to be. It's now actually got more range of adjustment than the clamp-on version has got because there are no clamps that can possibly run into each other, right? So really good ergonomics there. That shifter is operating a new rear derailleur that can handle a really wide range cassette, so up to a 1051, of course. And that derailleur's got a really improved kind of function from the previous generation. So when you pull cable with the shifter, the derailleur starts moving just sideways, so you don't have to work to break the clutch free inside the shifter. So your shifting effort is really, really light and really precise. And it's got a really wide range of adjustment as well. So you can kind of be off by a couple clicks of the barrel adjuster and your ride can still be really, really good still. That rear derailleur also gives us some better stability, so it keeps the chain from bouncing around so much. It's just a better design, so kind of same resistance from the clutch, but used in a smarter way. That rear derailleur also is a key part of maybe the most revolutionary part of the group, which is our Hyperglide Plus shifting. So Hyperglide's been around for a really long time. It's basically just using special shift ramps to get the chain to start driving the next cog before it's completely left the previous cog. So before Hyperglide existed, the chain would literally just jump from cog to cog, and you'd have a moment where like your driving energy wasn't moving the bike forward. So it would kind of create rough shifts, and you had to kind of finesse it into the next gear. And Hyperglide was a really big improvement, but it was only ever working as you were shifting into an easier gear and a larger gear. When you shift into a smaller gear, it's considerably harder to get that concept to work. So what we've all been riding is just a chain that just kind of jumps down to the next smaller cog, and it creates a rough shift, and we kind of learn to let off on the pedals just a little bit so that it can make the shift a little bit easier. But now with Hyperglide Plus, we have finally solved the engineering problem, and we can have guided shift ramps that go both up and down the cassette. And it's kind of a cool technology story, and it feels like a subtle difference when you first get on the bike, but then you kind of slowly start to realize how much harder you can push on the bike, and it makes a really big difference out on the trail. That you don't have to let up on the pedals at all as you start to drop into a descent and pick up speed, or maybe you exit a corner and you need to start pedaling in a hurry and get in the right gear. Like, you don't have to let up on the pedals at all. The bike just shifts super smooth as you're accelerating down the trail. The way that it works is because of a special interface between the chain and the cassette. So of course, totally redesigned shift ramps all the way across the cassette, and totally redesigned chain plate profiles as well. And a key part of it is that the inner plate on the chain, it sticks out a little bit further past the roller than it did before, and so it creates an additional point of contact between the chain and the cassette, so we can hold on to the teeth better, and that extra contact really is the key part of making Hyperglide Plus work. It also relies on chain tension in order to work, so when you're pushing harder on the pedals, your shifting actually gets better. And in fact, it is just incredible on an e-bike because there's this consistent high chain tension, and the shifting works really, really good. That chain design comes into play with the chainring interface as well. So again, that extended inner link, it contacts all of the teeth on the chainring. And by putting that inner plate in contact with all of the teeth on the chainring instead of just the skinny teeth on the chainring, we get a much more consistent engagement from chain plate to chain plate and from tooth to tooth. So it makes the chain vibrate less as you're driving. And of course, because there's extra surface area contact, we get improved holding. So we get better chain retention. So your chain doesn't come off in really, really rough trails, and you can push the bike really hard. And it actually pedals faster too, right? Like quieting down that vibration, it reduces wasted energy, and so your bike actually can go a little bit faster. Things are just smoother and quieter, and yeah. If you do want a front derailleur, like I said, we've got options for that. The left shifter is a really cool design. Because there's no triple, we don't need to have two separate levers. You're always just going to be in either the small chainring or the big chainring, so we just have one lever. So when you want to shift from the small chainring to the big chainring, you just push on the left shifter, and it shifts up to the big chainring, and the lever stays in that far position. So when you want to shift back down to the small chainring, you just push it again, and then it'll release back down to the small chainring. Or like all of our shifters, you can release in two different directions. So if you prefer to use your trigger finger, you can also just nudge the shift lever back to its starting position and get back down to the small chainring. It actually is really nice out on the trail because if you ever forget which chainring you're in, you can feel where the lever is with your fingers, so you don't have to look down to find out what gear you're in. The front derailleur is a super strong design as well. It uses our side swing design. So when the front derailleur swings, instead of trying to like swing and scoop the chain up to the big chainring, it's rotating forward in the same direction that the chain is already moving. So we get a really, really good front shift. The XT and SLX doubles come in a 26-36 option, so that paired with a 1045 cassette gives us the widest possible gear range that we can get. We get perfectly even gear steps all the way across the cassette because we're using that 1045 cassette. And then the 10-tooth jump in the front, that happens to be exactly the same as two shifts in the rear. So you can get a really seamless transition from one chainring to the next. Basically, you to get the feeling of just one shift, you just do one front shift and one rear shift the other direction to compensate for it, and it feels like one perfect seamless gear step. So essentially you get like 14 gear steps all the way across your range from the easiest gear to the hardest gear. So the ultimate range and really good performance and really good chain retention and driving efficiency, of course, as well. The driving efficiency, of course, is a little bit better for a double. So if that's the most important thing to you, then maybe that is your choice. The crank is rounded out or rounds out the drivetrain, and we're using a direct mount chainring for all of the new cranks. It is really easily changeable between a single and a double, right? For the double, just the big chainring is direct mount, and then the small chainring bolts to the big chainring. So if you want to maybe have a double chainring for training or for big like marathon rides where you're spending all day out in the mountains, and then you want to race or go like on vacation to the bike park and have just a single front chainring, then it's really easy to change the bike back and forth. Um, and there are a couple different versions and some things that haven't existed before. So, for example, we now have support for a 157 rear axle spacing. So a lot of people call it a super boost bike. And so that creates a 56.5 chain line. And so we've got a crank that has a 56.5 chain line. There, of course, is regular spacing 142 and 148, kind of traditional spacing options as well. They're supported with the crank. We actually don't need to do a special crank with a 49 millimeter chain line for a bike with a 142 rear end because that chainring design is really tolerant of putting the chainring wherever we need to. So we can push the chainring further out and still have really good driving performance. And when you backpedal, the chain doesn't derail, anything like that. It works really well. So it works so good that we don't need to make a 49 millimeter chain line for our single front chainring. So there's the 8100 and 7100 crank. Those use a 52 millimeter chain line. Whether you've got a 142 rear end or a 148 rear end for your axle spacing, those guys work really well. There is a new option as well. So the 8120 or 7120 cranks, those guys actually use a 55 millimeter chain line, which is not really related to like a new frame standard. It's just an option that we have. So because our chainring can sit further outboard and still have really good performance, we can use that to give back extra frame and tire clearance. So some bikes, maybe they could fit a really big tire, but if you tried to use it, then the chain would rub on the side of the tire. So if we move the chainring out, then we can get some good benefits from that. And it really kind of is the smarter choice for a lot of people. So if you have a 148 rear axle on your bike and you want to be sure that you have the most clearance possible, then that 55 millimeter chain line on the 8120 or 7120 crank, those are pretty much the way to go. But if you want to have a narrow Q factor and have your feet closer together, or of course if you've got a bike with a 142 rear axle, then you want to go with kind of the I guess the normal traditional 8100 or 7100 crank with the 52 millimeter chain line. And of course, if you've got the 157 rear end, then you want the 8130 or 7130. There's, of course, a couple of specs there, so it's always interesting and maybe a little bit confusing when there's new specs that haven't existed before, but it really offers a lot of freedom and better performance in your bike. So yeah, I hope it can be useful. For a double setup up front, we can't use the special teeth on the chainring because if you want to be able to shift in between them, then you can't have such strong holding force between the chain and the chainring. So we do have to have two separate specs for a 142 rear axle or a 148 rear axle. So it's the same as the single ring cranks. So it's the 8100 or 7100, and then the 7120 and 8120. So one of them is for 49 chain line, and one of them is for 52 chain line. They all are the exact same crank arms. The only difference between all of those different chain lines is just the length of the bottom bracket spindle, and then you run spacers in between the crank and the frame. So it's a really simple system. Let's see here. So the cranks, of course, are attached to the pedals. The pedals, we've got kind of just cosmetic updates for our flat pedals. They come in two sizes. They've got a little bit of concavity to them, and kind of what makes Shimano special. Kind of what makes Shimano pedals special is their durability. Really, it's a pedal that you can rely on for many years. That's kind of why people choose our pedals, especially our flat pedals. Like there's a lot of other choices out there, and maybe people will pick up somebody else's flat pedal, and then a year or two later, once it wears out, then they decide I just want to get a Shimano pedal because it's very durable. We make two different clip-in pedals. The cross-country version, it's basically the current design was really good, so we didn't feel like we needed to change it. So we just kind of changed the graphics so that it would match the rest of the new group. So if you want to be all matchy and coordinated, then you can get the new cross-country pedal. But the new bigger platform, the trail pedal, that's the one that's been totally redesigned. So the contact area between the shoe and the pedal is really greatly increased, especially behind the axle. So your weight stays really steady on the pedal. It feels really good. It's a much bigger improvement than we've ever seen before on our next generation of trail pedals. So I was really happy to see when it came to the XTR group, and now that we can have an XT version as well. It really can make a big difference on your ride. You feel a lot more connected to your bike. And for me, it allowed me to start using a more flexible shoe and be comfortable, so I can spend long time on the bike without my feet starting to get like hot spots or get tired. And then of course when I get off the bike, it's easier to walk around in a little bit more flexible shoe. And because I've got that extra support from the pedal, I still have really good pedaling efficiency as well. So I've started riding in more like a sneaker type shoe from Shimano. We have the AM line, so that feels really great with that pedal. And of course the ME line, those feel really great on that pedal as well. Maybe you'll feel just a little bit more connected and locked into the bike if you use the ME shoe versus the AM. Alrighty, so rounding out the group are the brakes, and this was a big decision that we had to make, because usually XT and SLX, they just have one brake spec. And so for a long time, it was a servo wave brake lever, which is a really high power brake lever. Adding the servo wave, it basically is like going up by a rotor size. It adds a lot of power, and but it's always just been paired to a 2-piston caliper. For the last generation XT, we added a 4-piston option at the end. We just reused the Saint caliper and put XT graphics on it, and so we could get a little bit more power out of the system. And we felt like that was necessary because trail bikes were getting more aggressive and people were going faster, and they were riding long travel 29ers that have got a lot more weight in the wheels and a lot more traction as well, so you can handle that increased braking power. And but it was kind of just addressing a need at the time. We didn't know if the next generation XT, if maybe we should only have 4-piston, or if we should just change the 2-piston brake a little bit. Right, we didn't know what to do, but basically at the end we decided that we really like where XT is right now with the previous generation, the M8000 brakes, having a single servo wave brake lever that's paired to 2 different kinds of calipers. So we redesigned the system, of course, so it's a new brake lever design that's got increased contact with the handlebar, so the clamp moves inboard, and then we have a little brace between the brake lever and the handlebar. And that leads to really efficient power transfer from the brake lever into the wheel, and there's less flex in the system. So it feels more solid, you feel more connected to your bike, you feel more in control, and your lever engagement point is more consistent because the whole brake lever is not flexing around when you pull on it. With the old system, if you pulled harder, then your engagement point would actually come in a little bit. So we've got a very stable and robust and strong and powerful system with the brake lever. And like I said, it's paired to either a 2-piston caliper or a 4-piston caliper, and they're both designed around the new system, right? So the 2-piston caliper gets a banjo hose fitting, but it's on the inboard side of the bike. So when you put it on your frame at the back wheel, it's a nice clean line from the caliper into the frame. So it looks really good and it's really easy to work on. It's a little easier to bleed the brakes and the hose doesn't rub on your frame. And that 2-piston brake, it uses kind of our traditional trail 2-piston brake pads. So that's a little bit different from the XTR generation, M9100 generation brakes, because that 2-piston brake is really for cross-country racing. So it uses a smaller brake pad. It uses the road brake pads basically, but the XT and SLX groups, those guys will they'll keep using the same 2-piston mountain bike brake pad that we've been using for a long time, and you can use the finned pads or the non-finned pads, whatever you prefer. For the 4-piston brake, of course, we're increasing the power, so we have the same total power output that Saint has always had. So it's a really high power brake, but the tune is a little bit different. So a Saint brake, the power comes on really, really quickly because it's designed for downhill racing, and you want to be able to slow down the bike really, really quickly and not touch the brakes until the last possible moment. But for trail riding, that's not really appropriate. So the power comes on just a little bit more powerful. But if you pull really hard on the brake lever, you will get the same total amount of power out of all of our 4-piston brakes. So the tune is really nice for trail riding. And of course, you can use finned or non-finned pads as well. We did a change to the brake pad shape for the new XTR group, and of course, the new XT and SLX brakes will use the new brake pad shape as well. So the finned area is a little bit shorter. It's just designed a little bit smarter, so it still cools off the brake pad just as effectively, but because there's less weight sticking out of the top of the caliper, then there's less weight to rattle around as you're riding, so the bike stays a little bit quieter. The calipers are compatible with the previous generation 4-piston finned pads as well, so if that's all you can find, if you're on vacation or something and you need replacement brake pads, or if you still have some in your supply, then you can keep using those finned brake pads. And of course, we've got metal pad options and resin pad options, so that you can tune the modulation and the power and the noise a little bit. So resin pads are quite a bit quieter than the metal pads are, and the power doesn't come on quite so quickly. So if you just barely touch your brakes, it's a little gentler. And some people prefer it. Kind of one of the problems that we've had with resin pads in the past is that they wear out really, really quickly, especially in wet conditions. So we introduced with XTR a new resin pad compound, and now we get a new 2-piston version of that with the XT brakes as well, and SLX. So if they come with resin pads, they'll come with the new brake pad compound, which lasts 40% longer. So it's a really big difference, a really big improvement, and maybe it can allow some people to use resin pads if they didn't like having to change them so often before. They also get tool-free reach adjust for both XT and SLX, so you can get the brake lever exactly where you want it out on the trail. And the difference really between SLX and XT is XT also gets a free stroke adjustment, so you can control the bite point independently of the reach of the brake lever. And of course, the brake lever is the other part of the iSpec EV system, so the shifter can mount directly to the brake lever. I think overall, the specs that we needed to make for modern mountain biking were really, really clear. Like, the market told us what they wanted to have on their bike. But what sets Shimano apart is the technology that we use to execute those specifications, right? So having much improved shifting over the previous generation, better ergonomics, better braking performance, of course a lighter system, and a more durable system. All of those, they go above and beyond just meeting the specifications that riders are looking for, and that's really what delivers the best possible performance on your mountain bike. So I think that's it. I think that's the whole story, and thanks for tuning in.
Galera, esse foi o Nick contando pra gente os detalhes, né? Tudo que a gente quer saber sobre os novos grupos XT e SLX. E você confere todas as novidades do mundo da bike aqui no MTB 90.